Have you ever noticed how something can be completely over and yet somehow continue happening inside your mind? A relationship ended years ago. The conversation is finished. The opportunity is gone. The decision cannot be changed. And still, you return to it. You replay what happened, what they said, what you should have said, what you failed to notice, what might have happened if you had made one different choice. People often tell us that healing means letting go. Stop thinking about it. Move on. Leave the past behind. But if letting go were simply a decision, most of us would have done it already. The deeper question is, why does the mind keep returning to something it can no longer change? Modern psychology gives us several answers. Memory helps us learn from experience. Regret allows us to imagine how different choices might have produced different outcomes. And our autobiographical memories help create the continuous story through which we understand who we are. So returning to the past is not necessarily a malfunction. Sometimes it is the mind trying to learn, trying to protect us, trying to make sense of something that disrupted the story we believed about our lives. Carl Jung approached this problem through a different psychological framework. He believed that emotionally charged experiences can become organized around what he called complexes. Patterns of feeling, memory, perception, and association that can influence us without being fully conscious. Modern psychology does not use Jung's complexes as a scientific explanation for why people remain attached to the past. But Jung was asking a question that remains surprisingly relevant. What if the past continues affecting us? Not simply because we remember what happened, but because what happened became connected to something we still believe about ourselves. In this video, we'll explore why the mind keeps replaying the past, why memory is not an exact recording, how regret can become a psychological loop, why some experiences become part of our identity, and what letting go actually means when forgetting is neither possible nor necessary. Imagine having an argument with someone you care about. The conversation ends badly. Hours later, you're making dinner, and suddenly the conversation begins again. Only now, you are having it alone. You remember their words. You imagine a better response. You discover an argument you wish you had made. Then another. By midnight, you have lived through the same 10-minute conversation 20 different ways. Why? Part of the answer involves something psychologists call counterfactual thinking. Counterfactuals are imagined alternatives to events that already happened. If I had left earlier, if I had noticed the warning signs, if I had chosen differently. This ability is not inherently unhealthy. In fact, it can be useful. Imagining how an outcome could have been different can help us identify mistakes, change future behavior, and make better decisions next time. Regret has a similar function. It compares reality with a better imagined alternative. The pain of that comparison can teach us something, but there is an important difference between learning from the past and repeatedly circling it. Once the useful information has been extracted, the mind may continue asking questions that no longer have actionable answers. What if I had known? What if they had changed? What if I had been different? And because the imagined alternative can never be tested, there is no final answer capable of closing the loop. This is where reflection can turn into rumination. Rumination is not simply remembering something often. It involves repetitive thinking that circles around distress, its causes, consequences, and meaning without necessarily producing effective action. The mind feels busy. It feels as though it is solving something, but often it is returning to the same material. Carl Jung would have described this persistence differently. He was deeply interested in experiences that seemed to capture psychological attention beyond conscious intention. For Jung, the intensity of the reaction mattered. Why this memory? Why this person? Why does this particular experience still have emotional power when thousands of other moments have disappeared? Modern psychology would not assume there is one hidden symbolic answer. But both perspectives lead toward an important distinction. Sometimes we return to the past because it still contains information we can use. And sometimes we return because the mind has not accepted that there is no version of the present that can rewrite what already happened. There is another reason the past can become so powerful. The past we revisit is not simply the original event preserved unchanged. Human memory does not work like a camera. When we remember something, we reconstruct it. Fragments of an event are brought together with existing knowledge, current emotions, later experiences, and the meaning the event has acquired since it happened. That does not mean your memories are false. And it certainly does not mean that painful experiences did not happen. It means remembering is an active psychological process. Imagine opening an old photograph every year. The photograph itself stays the same. But you don't. At 20, you see one thing. At 30, you notice something else. After another relationship, another loss, another decade of experience, the same moment can acquire an entirely different meaning. Autobiographical memory works partly in this way. It does more than preserve information. It helps maintain continuity between the person you were, the person you believe you are now, and the person you expect to become. That is why certain memories become unusually important. They become evidence. This is why I don't trust people. This is when everything changed. This proves I always ruin good things. This was the last time I was truly happy. Notice what has happened. A memory is no longer only describing the past. It is explaining the present, and perhaps predicting the future. This is where memory and identity begin interacting. The stories we repeatedly tell about important experiences can influence how those experiences are organized within our understanding of ourselves. But there is a danger here. If one painful event becomes the central explanation for who we are, new experiences may begin getting interpreted through the old story. Someone leaves, therefore people always leave. One decision fails, therefore I cannot trust myself. One betrayal becomes evidence that closeness is dangerous. The past begins functioning less like a chapter and more like a lens. And this helps explain why just forget about it is such useless advice. Forgetting the event would not necessarily change the meaning attached to it. Because sometimes what keeps the past alive is not the memory itself. It is the role that memory has begun playing in the story of who we are. This is where Carl Jung's idea of the complex becomes particularly interesting. Jung developed his early thinking about complexes partly through word association experiments. He noticed that certain emotionally significant words could disrupt a person's responses. They might hesitate, make unusual associations, forget, react emotionally. Jung concluded that some clusters of memories, feelings, ideas, and associations could become psychologically charged. He called them feeling-toned complexes. A complex was not simply a bad memory. It was more like an emotionally organized pattern capable of influencing attention, interpretation, and behavior. Jung sometimes described complexes as having a degree of autonomy, not because he literally believed another person was living inside us, but because we can sometimes react in ways that feel strangely unlike our deliberate intentions. You may know that one person is not your former partner, and still become intensely afraid when they behave in a similar way. You may know that one mistake does not define you, and still experience criticism, as though an old humiliation is happening again. The present event is real, but part of its emotional intensity may belong to a much older network of meaning. Modern psychology would explain these phenomena through different frameworks. It does not require Jung's theory of autonomous complexes, but research on autobiographical memory supports a broader point. Personal memories are deeply involved in maintaining our sense of identity and continuity across time. And that creates a strange problem. Sometimes letting go of an old story can feel like losing part of yourself. Imagine someone who was betrayed years ago. For years, the betrayal explains their caution, their independence, their difficulty trusting, perhaps even their strength. Who would they be if that event stopped organizing their life? Or imagine someone who sacrificed an opportunity for another person. The regret becomes part of their identity. I'm the person who gave up my chance. Eventually, letting go can feel almost like saying the sacrifice didn't matter. But those are not the same thing. An experience can remain important without remaining in control. This may be one of the hardest psychological transitions. We often assume we are holding on to the past because we cannot forget it. But sometimes we are holding on to the interpretation of the past because we no longer know who we would be without it. Sometimes the thing we cannot release is not actually the event. It is the alternative life attached to it. The relationship that should have worked. The career you might have had. The family you imagined. The apology you expected. The version of yourself you believe would exist if one moment had gone differently. Psychology calls imagined alternatives to the past counterfactuals, and they can become especially painful because reality has limits, while imagination does not. Reality contains what happened. Counterfactual thinking contains every possibility that didn't, and imagined lives have one enormous advantage over real ones. They never have to encounter reality. The relationship that never happened never becomes ordinary. The career you didn't choose never becomes stressful. The person who left never has another opportunity to disappoint you. The alternative remains protected because it exists only in imagination. This helps explain why regret can persist. Research connects regret with comparisons between present reality and imagined better alternatives, particularly when we believe a different choice might have produced a better outcome. But sometimes what remains unfinished is not a decision. It is a relationship. Grief research has challenged the older assumption that healthy adaptation always requires complete emotional detachment from someone who has died. The idea of continuing bonds recognizes that people can maintain an inner relationship with someone they have lost, and that this is not automatically pathological. That matters because letting go is often misunderstood. You do not necessarily need to stop loving someone who is gone. You do not need to erase an important relationship, and you do not need to convince yourself that something painful was secretly good for you. Sometimes adaptation means changing the relationship you have with what happened. The memory remains, the love remains, perhaps even the sadness remains, but they no longer require you to keep your life frozen at the moment of loss. Jung's perspective adds another layer. He believed unresolved emotional material could continue influencing us when we failed to bring it into conscious relationship with the rest of our personality. But consciousness does not mean discovering a magical hidden explanation. Sometimes the truth is painfully ordinary. You wanted something, and you did not get it. Someone hurt you, and they may never apologize. You made the best decision you could, and it still ended badly. There may be no explanation that makes the past fair. And sometimes, what keeps us trapped is the belief that we must understand everything before we are allowed to continue living. So what does it actually mean to let go? It cannot mean erasing memory. We do not control memory that way. It cannot mean becoming emotionally indifferent. Some experiences should remain important, and it does not necessarily mean forgiveness. You can stop organizing your life around what someone did without deciding that what they did was acceptable. A more useful definition might be this: the past becomes integrated when it can remain part of your story, without constantly deciding what happens next. You remember the relationship, without measuring every new person against it. You remember the failure, without treating every new opportunity as proof that it will happen again. You remember the mistake, without requiring your future self to continue serving a sentence imposed by your past self. Modern approaches that emphasize psychological flexibility offer a useful framework here. Psychological flexibility involves being able to experience difficult thoughts and emotions while still acting in ways connected to present values and goals. Research consistently associates greater psychological inflexibility with poorer well-being, although much of that evidence is correlational and does not mean flexibility alone explains psychological health. The distinction is important. The goal is not, I must stop thinking about the past before I can live. That requirement gives the past even more power. A different approach is, the memory is here, the feeling is here. What does the life in front of me require now? This does not make grief disappear. It does not remove regret. It does not guarantee that intrusive or painful memories will stop returning. But it changes the relationship between memory and action. And perhaps this is where Jung's thinking remains useful. Psychological growth, for Jung, required becoming more conscious of the forces influencing us, not destroying our history, not pretending it never happened, but recognizing when something from the past has quietly taken control of the present. Sometimes that recognition requires reflection, sometimes conversation, sometimes psychotherapy, and when memories are traumatic, persistent, overwhelming, or significantly interfering with everyday life, professional evidence-based care may be more appropriate than trying to interpret them alone. Because letting go is not the moment when the past disappears. It is the moment when the past can exist, without requiring the future to repeat it. Perhaps the reason we struggle to let go of the past is that the past was never only a collection of events. It taught us what to expect, what to fear, what to regret, who to trust, and eventually who we believed ourselves to be. Carl Jung believed that emotionally charged experiences can continue shaping us outside full conscious awareness. Modern psychology describes the mechanisms differently. Memory is reconstructive. Regret compares reality with imagined alternatives. Rumination can keep attention circling around unresolved distress. And autobiographical memory helps maintain the story of who we are. None of this means that remembering is the problem. The goal is not to become someone with no past. Perhaps the goal is to stop requiring the past, to keep explaining the present. You can remember without returning. You can grieve without remaining frozen. You can regret something without building your identity around the person you were when it happened. And you can carry an experience forward without allowing it to choose every road that comes next. If you enjoyed this exploration of Carl Jung's ideas, subscribe to Hidden Patterns. In our next episode, we'll uncover another hidden pattern shaping the human mind. Until then, remember this. Maybe letting go does not mean leaving the past behind. Maybe it means finally allowing it to become what it already is. Something that happened to you, rather than somewhere you still have to live.